It's that time again to start getting ready for Portland's premier pop culture event. Rose City Comic Con is returning September 5th through the 7th, and they're bringing a special guest from The Goonies, Stranger Things, Battlestar Galactica, and that's on top of all the already amazing roster of comic book artists, writers, and non-stop panels and activities. You can buy your badges now at rosecitycomiccon.com, and even more guest announcements are still coming, so stay tuned. Tired of driving to the coast? Grab a ride on the North Coast Express. It's the new seasonal transit option connecting Portland to the most iconic destinations on the Oregon North Coast. This luxury bus runs Friday through Sundays through the end of August. Flexible ticketing lets you choose between a spontaneous day trip or a longer stay. For schedules, tickets, and other details, go to visittheoregoncoast.com/express. That's visittheoregoncoast.com/express.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about the death in police custody that's reigniting the debate over reform, the community backlash as Portland opens new overnight shelters, and the Lloyd Center's new life as a kind of post-capitalist creative utopia. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are KBOO News Director Althea Billings and Stumptown Savings founder Bryan M. Vance. It's Friday, August 1st. I'm John Notarianni in for Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome, everyone, to the Friday News Roundup. Bryan, Althea, thanks for hanging out with me today.
Hey, John.
Hey, John.
So for those of you who are new to the show, today is the day on Fridays we like to break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. But before we get into the news, I like to ask an opening question, sort of help our listeners get oriented, get to know our guests a little bit better. And today's opening question is actually related to some big news here at CityCast, which is that we are hiring. We are planning to launch 2 new shows this year. CityCast Seattle is going to be starting. We're also launching CityCast Twin Cities this fall, and we are looking for people to join the founding teams in both of those cities. We're looking for a host and creative producers and audience development folks and senior account executives for both of the teams. So if you're interested or you know somebody else who might be, you can check it out at citycast.fm and scroll down to the jobs section to see more info. So in honor of us bringing Seattle into the fold of CityCast, look, I know we've got plenty to pick on Seattle about, and they will get their due in time. But I'm going to start off extending an olive branch here. What is the one thing that you think they have in Seattle that we don't have, that you wish we had here in Portland?
Oh, man. They have a chain, like a small chain. There's like 3 locations of it, of these Caribbean sandwich shops.
Okay.
Holy cow, if we could get those in Portland, I would eat them every single day. That is not an exaggeration. Like, think of
what sort of sandwiches are these?
It's basically like a banh mi, but with Caribbean flavors. So instead of Vietnamese pork or whatever, it's like jerk chicken or slow roasted pork thighs with like mango. It's called Un Bien, I think. It's so good, John.
You took a totally different tack than I was thinking. My thought was shadowy billionaires. I feel like they just, like
they definitely have us on that.
We've got like Phil Knight, which is kind of like an older generation of shadowy billionaire.
He's
I feel
grandpa.
Like they are so on the cutting edge of like the Bezos and like a million other people that gives you someone to sort of rail against in a good way as a society. Like we need that sort of unifying force of like shadowy overlords to fight against.
Everybody we might want to rail against here is like way too accessible.
Exactly.
I don't know. I'm good with us not having a ton of billionaires personally.
What do you mean? You don't want to get on board with this?
No.
What about you, Althea?
Well, I'm from Seattle, so of course there's many people that I love that live in Seattle that I would love to drag down to Portland. And a lot of times I'm talking about things that I like about Portland in comparison to Seattle, so it's good to flip it every now and again. Genuinely, though, I think that Seattle has more of a big city attitude than Portland does. We're sort of thinking, we think small sometimes. We're a town.
Oh, yes.
This is what it is. We can't do any better than this, or we attack our problems in a small town. It's a city. let it go. There's a lot of different people that live here. They do a lot of different stuff. You know, you can't get your panties in a twist. It's a city. Keep walking. You know.
Okay, Fran Lebowitz. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, you guys. Let's get into the news of the week. Althea, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I'm looking at a story from OPB. It's called Portland Police Union Criticizes City Leaders for quote unquote false binary between police and Portland street response. So this article is talking about what Portland Police Association leader Aaron Schmautz was talking about at a recent consent decree hearing with the DOJ. All of that is a lot of lingo. Basically, Portland has been under the federal thumb, so to speak, since 2012 for using excessive force against people in mental distress. And every so often, we're talking to the judge about, hey, are we complying for a full year and you can leave us alone? And the answer so far has been no. So this is what the leader of the police union has been talking about and pointing at, well, vaguely pointing at, I should say, not always naming names, about city councilors and some city staff that he perceives to be maybe overly critical or not accepting what Portland Police's role is in the emergency response system compared to Portland street response. And right, this is coming on the heels of a very tragic thing that happened, which is that police killed a Black Portlander named Damon Lamar Johnson with the same hold used to murder George Floyd. And this is somebody who was in a mental health crisis, and police were supposed to be performing a welfare check, and they came into his apartment and held him that way for 3 minutes, even though he had been, responsive and communicative when they came in, and had said that he surrendered and all of this. So, of course, there's community backlash when something like this happens because, even part of the reason that PSR, Portland Street Response, started in Portland was able to gain so much ground in Portland was because of George Floyd and also this history that Portland has since 2012 with the consent decree of police showing up and going way too hard on people who are in crisis. And so PSR is supposed to be the balm for that. So earlier this month, many of the different oversight bodies that are involved in policing, including the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, had this listening session, and folks were talking about, hey, Portland Street Response should have been there. First of all, it shouldn't have gone down like that. Second of all, why were police in there alone using so much force? We actually have an alternative. It's not the question is not, hey, police, don't do that. The question is, why weren't these other folks there? And so then, the police association president was talking about this Instagram story post that Counselor Mitch Green posted where he was like, oh, he's falsifying invoices and using the digits for ACAB, but it was from an art exhibit. And then there's a lot of complicated sort of things talking about that there's like a false binary between the two. But, we've heard from Police Chief Day, that there has been some feeling of like maybe Portland police shouldn't have been there at all. But there's all of these restraints on PSR right now as well.
Yeah.
They're not able to be there.
Oh my gosh, there's so much I want to get into on this. First, let's just start off with Damon Lamar Johnson, who is the person that was killed by the Portland police. I saw that the district attorney is opening a grand jury to sort of examine what happened there. Do we have a sense of what the process on that is going to be?
That's part of it, right? And it's also, I think, worth noting that this is the first police killing that is on body cameras. But historically in Portland, even going to a grand jury with these types of cases, it's been extremely, extremely rare that officers have faced accountability on the scale of getting fired or let alone, getting in legal trouble for what they've done.
Right.
What jumps out to you, Bryan?
The fact that we're talking about social media is just I don't know. I was reading that part about where the police union guy got upset about, this Instagram post, which is just oh my gosh, come on. But it's just so much of what's happening in our city right now feels like a bunch of middle schoolers are running it. And this is exactly that. It's just petty social media drama between rival cliques. It's just grow up.
Yeah, and maybe I should explain this a bit more. So Mitch Green put out this image of, it's basically a list of like expenses totaling up to $44 million that the police bureau had racked up. I believe this was from a Juneteenth exhibition, right? And
that's my understanding.
And if you look in, the invoice number on it was 1312. You sort of have to squint to see it, but like, of course, 1312 is sort of a shorthand for all cops are bastards, which, you know, Mish Green said that he and his staff hadn't noticed that detail, but the union jumped on it to be like, look, these guys are biased against us.
But like in the scale of what we're talking about, I totally feel what you're saying, Brian. It's like an ad hominem attack. It's like, well, you're a jerk, and you've been saying mean stuff behind my back. It's like, okay, well, you guys killed somebody in a way that is like so laden with the white supremacist and racist structures that people have been trying to handle for the past, for forever, but of course it's been under great scrutiny. And the fact that we've never spent 1 year in compliance with what the DOJ,
that's insane.
and it's the DOJ's standards. The DOJ standards, which are not high.
13 years. Yeah. The thing that's interesting to me about this is sort of the Portland Street response component of it. Because like on one hand, like, yes, this is a classic sort of mental health crisis, the way that it's been
the thing
described.
they were set up to work on.
But at the same time, there is a detail that he was hanging knives out of a window, which, you know, Portland Street Response is an amazing program, but some of its stipulations include that they don't respond when there are weapons seen, and they don't respond when a person is inside of a private residence. Which is not to say that, like, this program couldn't expand to do that. It's just not at this moment the sort of thing that it is set up to do. And it is going to require a pretty significant increase in the program and in its staffing and in its budget and in all of this. I do think that we get into this position sometimes where we talk about like, we'll send Portland Street Response out. But I just don't think that the Portland Street Response we have today is staffed or funded to really be able to do that.
They're not even allowed, you know, like you were saying, like they're literally barred from doing some of these things that people are asking. I think the bigger thing here is like, these organizations should be working together. Like, yeah, maybe PSR shouldn't go alone if there's weapons, but why couldn't a PSR person and a PPB person go together to respond to something so that you have expertise from both sides of these approaches?
Wasn't there recently an expansion of the program to permit that to happen, though?
I will say, I know that some of the history of Portland Street Response is that, and John's right, this was sort of part of the negotiations to be able to expand and to give them more staff and things like that, is that they don't necessarily want to show up with police because they want to build trust with community. A lot of these behavioral health calls are, you know, people who are homeless and they want to be able to pull them towards services or housing or like whatever it is that they really need. And so PSR, I think historically has kind of resisted that a little bit. But I totally see what you're saying. Why couldn't police have gone in, swept for weapons, saw that this guy was talking to people, and then had somebody else with more expertise to be able to come in? I mean, the details of it are so heinous as well. I do also hear kind of what John is saying, which is not that PSR is this one size fits all kind of Band-Aid solution. It wouldn't have gone down like that if Portland Street Response responded instead of PPB, but it is still so egregious. They wouldn't let the medics do CPR. The medics were like, "Can we uncuff him, please?" And meanwhile, he's unconscious, possibly dead at this point. It boggles the mind, and just sort of the callousness that, you know, walking around with a lethal weapon sometimes imbues in people. It's this tragic thing that we have a solution for, but we haven't invested in the solution for. And also, I will note, you know, some of the restrictions on PSR are things that like they want to maintain the scope of the program, but it's also the reason that Portland Street Response doesn't respond to welfare checks is partly because that's in the Portland Police contract. Right. And historically, they've been unwilling to give up their like jurisdiction over those type of calls.
Yeah.
Yeah, the very union that this man works for, they're the people who fight tooth and nail to not give up what they see as control of certain actions in the city.
Yeah. All right. Well, Althea, thank you for walking us through that. Let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, more news of the week.
If you're a home DIYer like me, you might have a few leftover paint cans gathering dust in your basement. Or maybe your house already came with a bunch of them like mine did. So I'm happy to share that Paint Care makes recycling your leftover paint, stain, and varnish simple and easy with convenient drop-off locations as close as your local hardware store. Paint Care has 3 simple rules for painting smarter. 1, buy the right amount of paint for the job. 2, use up leftover paint. And 3, recycle the rest. If you visit paintcare.org/3simplerules, you'll find tips on how to do all 3. Buying the right amount of paint for your project, exploring DIY ideas for how to use up leftover paint, and also just look up the nearest drop-off site in your neighborhood. Paint Care is all about keeping it simple for Oregonians. Cathedral Park Co-Housing is creating a community of connection and belonging in North Portland. Their common spaces are designed for accessibility, helping create a multi-generational, mixed-income, and mixed-ability community that welcomes everyone. Plus, their land is walking distance or a very short drive to many amenities, including, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful parks in our city and plenty of nature trails. To learn more about Cathedral Park Co-Housing and see if it might be a right fit for you or a loved one, go to cathedralparkcohousing.com/events. That's cathedralparkcohousing.com/events and sign up for a virtual information session or just call Alicia at 503-319-5003. Act soon because they are close to breaking ground and homes are selling fast.
Well, today I'm looking at some reporting from Lillian Monjo-Hughes at the Oregonian and Alex Zielinski at OPB, updating where we're at on Mayor Wilson's giant shelter plan. He's pushed to open 1,500 overnight-only shelter beds by December 1st. Right now, we have about 250 open, about 380 on the way. And the news this week, a new overnight-only shelter is set to open downtown next Monday. It's going to be in the former St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, which is at like 13th and Clay, sort of in Southwest, right off the 405 on the edge of downtown. It is the third of these 15 planned shelters that the mayor is going to be opening. It's going to have 80 beds, open from 9 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. So far, it seems like there's some excitement around it. There isn't really any significant organized opposition, which is notable in contrast to another shelter, which is going to be opening just a mile up the road in the Pearl. This is a 200-bed shelter planned at 15th and Northrop. A similar setup, overnight only, first come, first serve. Well, they had a public meeting, the mayor and his staff did on Monday with about 500 attendees, and people in the neighborhood are pissed about this. Mayor Wilson was booed at certain points, people saying there hadn't been enough neighborhood input. At one point, apparently someone just shouted lies at Mayor Wilson's face. And the criticism of this specific shelter, the one that's going in the Pearl, is sort of coming in from a bunch of angles. There's sort of this NIMBYism of I don't want a shelter in my neighborhood. But there's also increasingly people sort of questioning the mayor's plan about just doing overnight short-term shelters disconnected from housing. Former Multnomah County Commissioner Sharon Mirren was there. We know Mirren has been a critic of the sort of plan that the city and the county have on tackling the shelter system for a long time. Mirren said, "We're here talking about one piece of a plan in isolation. I want to hear a plan for not just where people sleep, but what happens next. How are they being connected to housing? What services will they have during the day?" There's a disconnect. What do you guys think?
I mean, she's right.
Yeah, she's not wrong.
She's not wrong about what some of her concerns are. I think that's kind of been the criticism this whole time. What happens during the day, and from the reporting that I read about it, the next thing they're going to work on is day shelters, which will be open by December 1st. So just chill until then, guys. Just hang out.
Yeah. They're saying there will be a day shelter open in each of the 4 city districts by December 1st. Not as much of a timeline on those.
It makes sense to me that setting up a day shelter is logistically a little bit more complicated than setting up a night-only shelter. You don't have to staff it as long. You don't have to have as many resources. So, the whole point of Mayor Wilson's plan seems to be, let's get some action going. I understand why some people might be skeptical and thinking like that's the only thing, but I don't think he's ever said that that's the only part of his plan. Like, he's been very vocal about his long-term vision for this, and he's also very, very critical of the way the county handles stuff.
Yeah, I do think it's worth pointing out that with these overnight shelters, there are a number of services that they're going to be offering beyond just housing. They're going to have food, they're going to have storage, they're going to have, mental and social services available 3 nights a week. So there's more to it.
Crates for pets, places to keep your pet safe.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, the question does stand like, how do we get from here where we sort of have these things that are life-saving spaces, but are also clearly sort of like intermediary steps to a much more comprehensive plan. And I think we're still a long ways from seeing that, even the plan for that to come together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to crawl before you can run, and I think that's what we're seeing with the mayor's plan here. And I don't think everyone is okay with that. And there's going to have to be some compromise here. Like, not everyone's going to be happy with the solution. Mm-hmm. Not everyone's happy right now. There are thousands of people who I can guarantee are not happy. They're living on the streets. Like, that's not fun. Mm-hmm. That's not an ideal solution for them. But we have to do something. And just like fighting about what we're going to do is not getting us anywhere.
Yeah. What do you think, Althea?
This conversation has been laden with idioms, and I had another one to put on the pile because I think that do you guys know the throwing starfish one?
No.
Throwing starfish?
Throwing starfish. It's like, this kid, he's on the beach and all of these starfish have washed up on the beach. And so he starts, chucking them back in the sea. And this guy comes up to him and he's like, you're not going to be able to save all the starfish, man. Like, what are you doing? And the kid chucks another one and he goes, I saved that one, didn't I? And so like this idea of let's make sure we're throwing the starfish in the right direction. Make sure they're getting back in the water.
Beach.
But again, it's this sort of
is it good to throw the starfish? Do we want to be throwing the starfish?
Well, the starfish need to go back in the water. I don't know how much you know about ocean life, John.
Okay, the throwing of the starfish sort of, we're throwing them into the water. Got it.
Yeah, throwing them back in the water. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we have to start moving in those directions, I guess. Like when I heard it from Wilson, it was sort of unique of like, guys, this is a humanitarian crisis that we've gotten really used to seeing all the time.
Yeah,
and
we normalized it.
There was, addressing the humanitarian aspect from giving out tents and tarps and sleeping bags, like that can be throwing starfish, like keeping people alive. Harm reduction, that can be throwing starfish, but also, giving someone somewhere to sleep and making sure they have a muffin to start the next day, which is kind of what it sounds like for the St. Stephen's location, is also maybe a little bit better of a situation than we were in, prior to.
Yeah.
I think the NIMBYism part is so funny because it's like, of course nobody wants a shelter in their neighborhood, but would you rather have tents? Because that's what's going to happen. Is like, they need a place to sleep. There's a bunch that are opening on 82nd. They're run by the county, not by the city. But like just a block north of the McDonald's on Stark and 82nd, that used to be a disaster zone. There were derelict RVs, there were tents, everything. They opened like a tiny house shelter in the lot right next door. It's so clean. There's no RVs around. Like there's a few dozen people sleeping in it. Like it is night and day a better solution for everyone.
Yeah, so it's and one of the data points that the city is throwing around is that they're seeing a reduction in crime in the neighborhoods where these shelters are going in. I actually think that was the detail that got the lies screamed from the audience. But it's what the data says.
And I mean, we've seen this with all kinds of things, but we've really gotten disconnected from having honest, thoughtful conversations, especially when data points push back on beliefs and narratives that we've and perceptions. And like the fact is the data is clear. The crime in the surrounding area goes down.
Yeah.
And if that's really what the heart of the issue is here, that you're like, we don't want crime and a bunch of homeless people in our neighborhood. Well, guess what? Building a shelter is actually a better solution than just like having it be lawless and the same thing that these people are screaming about, that the city just lets people do whatever they want.
Yeah. All right, well, let's take a quick break here, and then when we come back, more news of the week.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 45% off site-wide, plus a professional measure at no cost. Rules and restrictions apply.
All right, Brian, what are you looking into today?
I have a bit of a fun story from Samantha Swindler, reporter at The Oregonian. She spent some time at the Lloyd Center documenting what's going on in Portland's favorite ghost mall. A lot of people think of it as a ghost mall. Turns out it's not. There's a lot of activity going on there. So yeah, there are no major box stores there. The last box stores left the Lloyd Center in like 2021 or something like that. But when you get inside, it's like teeming with life. It's sort of become an incubator for small businesses and nonprofits and people who just have weird ideas. Because, you know, a company bought up the Lloyd Center property a few years ago. They have big plans to redevelop it into something a little bit more like Bridgeport Village. So like mixed use, retail, living spaces, stuff like that. That's the long-term goal. But they haven't set a timeline for when they're actually going to start doing it. And in the meantime, what I think is really cool about the new owners of the Lloyd Center is they're renting the place out at rock bottom prices, and they're actively inviting people to come in and set up shops with, you know, an asterisk that they have a 60-day termination clause in all their leases. And Samantha did report that as of now, they're no longer taking long-term leases, which is a sign that maybe they're going to move on redeveloping a little bit sooner than a lot of people hoped for. But over the past like 2 years, some really interesting, cool businesses have popped up in the Lloyd Center. There is a lightsaber. Like, I don't even know how to describe this. It is basically like they make lightsabers like what you would see in Star Wars, and then you can actually like fight with them in there. There's a roller derby in there. There's pickleball courts. There's a secondhand pet supply store in there, which I've been to, and it's super cool. Like, these are not things you're going to find in other parts of Portland, and it's specifically because of the fact that those big businesses left and that this company has realized that they could make a little bit of money right now rather than just letting it set fallow, that has like created this really interesting, unique space that there's really nothing else like it in Portland. Have either of you been to the Lloyd Center in the past few years?
Yeah, I was there last year. I mean, it is wild. It is like the perfect promise of like post-apocalyptic dystopia of a mall where the Nordstrom is literally partially demolished at this moment. But then you go inside and it's just like tons of weird little indie boutiques and art galleries and like pop-up installations. It's really cool.
It's really cool. I haven't spent a ton of time. I stopped in for a gumball once, but in these videos that the Oregonian made, there was one person that they interviewed that referred to kind of what's going on as that they were squatting in a capitalist temple. Yeah. Which totally goes to what you were saying, John. And it is so cool what happens when stuff is affordable. Like, people make place. The Lloyd Center is cool because people have the ability, because the rent is like $1,000 or something, to come in and like build their weird art installation or whatever it is that they want to do. And it reminds me a lot of kind of like how Portland built our food culture, and that like Portland is kind of a foodie city, partially because of food truck culture, like that it is this lower barrier for chefs, for people with inspiration to start noodling, start working things out, making a business that then can grow on into these other, you know, more established, maybe more respected places. It's just cool that this exists, and then it's like, damn, it's going away. That's
I know, that's the really heartbreaking part here. And, you know, a lot of the people that Samantha talked to, like, they understand that it probably is going to go away, but they have real hopes that it doesn't, that it sticks around. Unfortunately, I think that those hopes are going to be squashed. There's just too much money to be made here. But it shows a real need for something like this. And I don't know if it's something that the city could subsidize or Metro, the regional government, could subsidize, but there's a need for a place like this that can serve as an incubator for people's wild retail dreams, you know?
I mean, but think of it, like, how many empty big box stores do we have in this region?
So
you know?
many, John.
I mean, how many empty Best Buys and freaking
Bed Bath and Beyond.
Bed Bath and Beyonds and Walmarts are just like sitting out there, you know? It feels kind of like, you know, what industrial lofts were maybe 20 years ago. They were these sort of underutilized spaces that just became a place that people who were creative and ambitious were able to take over. And like, I could totally see a wild pop-up bazaar or a new roller derby rink popping up in like an old Target, you know?
Yeah.
Like, why not?
Well, why not, John? We can cross town to Mall 205. You see the exact opposite. It is literally a ghost mall. There is nothing inside it. The last tenant, the Oregon DMV, left town last year because the landlords wouldn't fix the air conditioning in the building, and it was just getting miserable for people. It's sitting fallow, and no one can quite figure out why. Like, they could do the same thing. They actually were doing the same thing when it was open. There weren't traditional mall businesses there near the end. You know, some of the people who were at the Lloyd Center were actually at Mall 205.
Yeah.
Like, it was doing that. But for whatever reason, the people who bought the Mall 205 property would rather it sit empty and just sort of waste away than actually use the space while they're waiting to figure out whatever they're doing. And I do think it's an interesting parallel to what's going on at the Lloyd Center.
Well, one thing that maybe is worth noting, especially with John's burgeoning plan to divide up the nation's Best Buys, which I'm very into. But I think what's cool about like the mall and what seems to be working for people is that it's small. You know, like the idea of finding another retailer to fill in, you know, like the Fred Meyer that's leaving because of whatever reason. If you can subdivide that out into different spaces, you know, some of those things that would be a really high bar for like a really small business or a weird art space or a roller derby rink to kind of get to, maybe that's something that is easy to find in those stores, you know, like bathrooms, having storage, having AC, having it be ADA accessible, like all of those types of things are built into these box stores, which, you know, they're not necessarily investing in the community, but maybe the small business of it all, you know, small businesses.
Yeah. And I think it's cool. You know, I was mentioning a lot of like retail or event style. There are nonprofits that have set up shop in the Lloyd Center that are doing really interesting things. Even that secondhand pet store I was talking about, it's technically a nonprofit that is doing all kinds of things to help rehome former lab animals, you know, and
Bryan, I don't know if you remember this. At one point, we were looking at moving into the Lloyd Center. Like CityCast Portland was looking at co-leasing a space in the Lloyd Center. The electrical hum of the mall was a little bit too loud for us to be able to record audio in there, but like we considered it too.
Yeah. It's just like there aren't many places that have the facilities that have the physical needs of a retail space that are affordable. And you look, there are other businesses that have already done this. You know, John was talking about lofts. Like, we have these huge, like, vintage malls. A lot of them are actually individual businesses inside a vintage mall.
Yeah.
And that's all they did. They didn't even have to build out, like, walls. They just, like,
they hang curtains.
Put up, like, they just hang curtains or room dividers or whatever. It's like, it doesn't have to be a huge investment. Sure, it won't look as nice and be as fancy, but especially when you're just trying to start out, like, I think there's value to just starting out with a minimum viable product, you know?
Yeah, it makes no sense. Turn every Walmart into like a hipster flea market, put a bar in the corner, have experimental theater on Thursday nights, and like, you know, you can like rent a like 10 by 10 square for $200 a month.
It's a phenomenal idea.
Yeah, I do wonder though, like, sadly, this idea, it has a timeline on it. And unless you get someone, either one of those billionaires y'all were talking about earlier, or the government to step in and buy up some of these properties and protect them with the sole purpose of being like an incubation space, we're not going to have these places. Like, they're going to get redeveloped. There's just too much money to be made redeveloping them into other things. They're not going to sit around.
Can I just note, it is so perverse that in our system that makes more financial sense for corporations to leave a giant plot of land unused, undeveloped, no love, no nothing there. That it
or
makes
fully
more
developed
sense.
with the infrastructure and electrical.
Ready to go, but just doing
it makes
nothing
more
with
sense
it.
to leave it than it does to develop it. I guess I'm thinking about the empty box stores in this.
No, totally. I think it's a real sign of why this entire country is in its housing crisis that it's in. It's because we have set up systems that allow that. And that's where a vacancy tax actually makes sense. Disincentivize people taking the tax write-off for leaving businesses sitting empty. I mean, I live east of 82nd. There are a lot of new developments on 82nd that have been sitting empty for years because they're just waiting for some big national brand to want to come in and do it. Don't let them do that. Like, you don't have to let them do that. You could charge them for making a space sit empty when we're talking about we don't have enough places for people to sleep, let alone enough places for people to open up their stores or move their restaurant to when, you know, the Ritz-Carlton comes into town and wants to build a high rise on an old food cart pod.
Totally. Yeah. Well, Bryan, thank you for breaking that down for us. Thank you for taking a feel-good story and turning it into a story about dystopia and post-capitalism.
I can always do that.
Appreciate it. All right. Well, before we head out today, speaking of small businesses, we have some shout outs from members of the Portland Neighbors program. So one of the perks of being a paying member of CityCast Portland is the opportunity to shout out a local business or an organization that you love. And here's a few that we've got this week. Emily H. wanted to shout out Cultivate Initiatives. They're a nonprofit doing amazing transformational work supporting neighbors experiencing homelessness in East Portland. Very cool. Dandelion wanted to shout out Sanctum, which is a nonprofit psychedelic research, education, and harm reduction organization in the Brooklyn neighborhood. They also have a library and a thrift store, plus they host open mic nights and other free events and mutual aid and educational series. And finally, Leah F. wanted to shout out, this one's right around the corner from me, Bastion Coffee Roasters on North Mississippi. Leah says, in a city that loves coffee, this spot rises above. Jason takes such pride in what he does, and it shows. So, yeah, thank you so much, Emily, Dandelion, Leah. Also, a huge thank you to all of the new members who joined recently. That is Colleen H., Ryan J., Nancy V., Hazel R., and Ryan FL. Thank you so much. If you join as a CityCast Portland neighbor, we would also be happy to read your shout-outs of places you love in Portland, alongside a whole bunch of other perks like ad-free listening. If you're curious, you can join at membership.citycast.fm. But yeah, Bryan, Althea, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for breaking down the news with me this week.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, John. Let's go to the mall.
Yeah.
Let's go to the mall. You didn't even talk about the mall walkers.
I know, it was in my notes. I had a lot of stuff I like.
There's so many weird things happening there. It is so... We were there a few months ago on one of the days that the card show takes over. And it was so wild because you're walking through people selling vintage Pokemon cards, and it felt a bit like a convention. And then there's a pretzel store right there. And it was just where am I? What is going on?
I love me a good hard pretzel. Yeah.
Oh, so good.
That's all for us today here on CityCast Portland, but thank you so much for listening. Our podcast production team this week was Julia Fiaioni, Francisco Kilgore, and Natalie Rivera. Our Hey Portland newsletter team was Rachel Monahan and Adrian Gonzalez, and our host is Claudia Meza. I'm executive producer John Notarianni. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drisos. Additional music by All the Kimonos, as well as Sarah the Instrumentalist, Timothy Infinite, and Gregory David, courtesy of Epidemic Sound. We'll be back on Monday morning with a whole lot more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.